Hi guys, my name is Janell if you're new here, and there are a lot of new people here. My last video blew up and it's really weird. I don't know how to feel about it or how to react, so I'm not going to in this video. But in my last video, a lot of you guys asked about the concept of your fantasy self, so I'm here to answer or explain about that a little more. So I think the most obvious way a lot of people do this is that their fantasy self dresses a certain way. And I think a lot of it has to do with you think you want to be this person, or you want to be this person who's like locked inside of you, and if you wear a certain item or if you own a certain thing, like if you own a home gym, you're going to be this amazing workout person, or if you own all these crafts, you're going to be a super creative crafty person, or if you're someone who paints, like that makes you an artist, and that says something about who you are as a person. I have this idea that it's like deeply rooted in this dissatisfaction and unacceptance of ourselves. I don't think most people accept themselves exactly as they are on like an unconditional basis. I know I definitely don't. And so I think we use shopping and buying things or clothes as a way to say, oh look, I own this thing, so I'm now this person, as a way to kind of mask that or cover it up or fill up some hole that's not being fulfilled in some other way. So like people who buy a lot of travel accessories and do all these travel things but don't actually end up liking traveling or never end up doing it. Some people might buy tons of kitchen equipment and these fancy knives and all these other things, and they don't even really like to cook. They just want to be someone who likes to cook. Ooh, maybe Fantasy You owns a lot of cookbooks. I did that. So maybe you own a home gym. Maybe you have a lot of fitness equipment that you don't actually use. Maybe you have a yoga mat because you think the idea of yoga sounds awesome, but actually doing yoga sucks. There's a lot of times when I was trying to make myself get more in shape or be healthier and be fitter, and instead of going to the gym, I would buy workout clothes. My grandpa actually used to do this a lot. He would always feel like he was getting old, and so whenever like the latest technology would come out, he would go and buy it even though he had no idea how to use it. And this was back in the day of like razor flip phones, so he bought a razor flip, barely could make a phone call on it, and there's like a lot of other things I did at the time. Did the same thing with like an iPad and an iPod. Had no idea what he was doing, but he felt like since he had this thing, he was young and he was hip. No disrespect to my grandpa, nice guy. Some people, they'll buy like a ton of books and then they never read the books, but just having the books makes them feel better. The thing that's like bad about this, there's nothing wrong with having a fantasy self that's like fearless and goes out of their way to do all these things, but I think it kind of makes you not satisfied with yourself. Like fantasy me is super extroverted, super suave. I know like spoken word poetry, and I am a social butterfly, and I like to go out every night and meet people and go out on the town. But really I'm super introverted, and I like spending a lot of my time alone, out in nature, and pretty quiet. Not that I don't like to do those things, but not near as much as fantasy me thinks I like to. So doing things for your fantasy self that doesn't actually fulfill your actual self, it's really draining. Buying all these clothes and things for your fantasy self gets really expensive and it takes up a lot of space. Basically, owning something doesn't make you become a different person or change who you are. And so it's really hard to let go of a lot of things in terms of material possessions, because if you let go of that thing, you have to let go of that idea of that fantasy self of who you are by owning that thing. And while it can be kind of hard to realize you have like limitations on what the things you want to do or the things that you can do, minimalism has taught me a lot about kind of choosing my hobbies very particularly. I was one of those people who, if I wanted to watercolor, I'd go out and buy watercolors, and then the next week I wanted to try and do something else, and so it would always start with me buying that thing, and it always ended with me probably never touching and never ever using that thing, but maybe once or twice. The thing about the fantasy self though is that I probably have like 10. They like to upgrade and revamp their identity pretty often, and so a lot of times when I'm shopping for something, or my initial gut reaction to buy something, I try to say, you know, if this is the real me, or is this some idea of who I think I will be if I own this thing. But yeah, no, minimalism, because of this, has taught me a lot. Like, you are not what you buy, you're not what you own, you're not what you spend your time doing necessarily. You are what you love, and you are what you enjoy, and you are the people you enjoy spending your time with. Not completely, but it's closer to that. Maybe your fantasy self is a minimalist, and maybe you're not a minimalist. Maybe you like a certain degree of clutter, and a little bit of clutter makes you really happy. But that's not like an excuse to be a hoarder, by any means. I don't think that's good for anybody. And I do think the fantasy self is different than like the fearless version of yourself. I think the fearless version of me would do spoken word occasionally. The fearless version of me would travel solo a little bit more than I have so far. And I think there's a difference between the fantasy version of yourself and the fearless version of yourself. The fantasy version likes to buy stuff and own things and collect things and define themselves by what they own. And then the fearless version of you goes out and does things that might otherwise give you a lot of anxiety or you would have a lot of fear about. I think it's really good to get out of your comfort zone. So I try to get out of my comfort zone a lot with little things, so when it's like a big step, it's not that crazy out of my comfort zone. I think people grow a lot when they get out of their comfort zone. But for example, I used to hate killing cockroaches. I don't have them in this apartment, but somewhere I used to live would get cockroaches, and I would get crickets in my apartment all the time. And I would always like put it under a mug and wait for someone to come kill it for me. Yeah, so to get out of my comfort zone, I would do little things like killing my own cockroaches. I used to think fish were so like, oh, weird to touch, and so I started like touching fish and like looking at them. Whenever I would see like a super gross bug or like a little kid would hand me a lizard, instead of being like grossed out by it, I'd be like, okay, no, this is like a baby step into the uncomfortableness. Cold showers will also do the same thing. So some ways I think a lot of people have their fantasy selves show up is maybe they own equipment or tools to do a certain thing, like maybe you have a snowboard to go snowboarding, or maybe you have a surfboard, maybe you have a boat. If anyone I know actually owns a boat, my financial demographics that I am speaking to I think are very different than I was expecting.